Before we jump into this episode, I want to tell you about something extra special that we're doing with this season of The Record Process and how it could involve you. With each season, we do our best to include diverse stories from a dynamic range of artists, producers, and music creatives. And so for this season of the show, we've decided to expand the conversation and broaden our horizons even further with the help of our friends at Groover. Groover is one of the hottest new international music promotion platforms, and it's being utilized by artists, labels, managers, and publicists to boost visibility for all of their projects online and around the world. So as a featured curator of Groover this month, The Record Process will be opening up our Season 7 track listing to any artist, producer, and songwriter, regardless of age, scale, or geographic location. Simply submit your music through the exclusive Groover link in the show notes by November 8th, share your story about what made the process so unique, and we'll select 3 of the submissions to be featured with their own dedicated interviews right here on The Record Process. These interviews will be released as the final 3 episodes of this season, so help us continue to inspire our fellow creatives by sharing your musical journey with the world through the innovative power of Groover. But for now, here's a new episode of
The Record Process.
On this episode, we welcome Bradley Vanderlot to the show. Bradley is a composer, drummer, and a founding member of the Michigan-based band La Dispute. Bradley was gracious enough to walk us through the making of La Dispute's critically acclaimed third studio album, Rooms of the House, which was released on March 18th, 2014. The album was named one of Rock Sound Magazine's top 50 albums that year, and the process of its creation is still a testament to the artistry of the band over a decade later. He shares some of his biggest takeaways from the band's early days of playing shows and how they ultimately chose to seclude themselves in a remote rental property in Michigan's Upper Peninsula when it came time to dig into the writing process for this album. You'll hear how the band recorded ambient sounds for the album, even capturing samples of remote radio station broadcasts, as well as how they decided to approach tracking the unique vocal delivery of the band's singer Jordan Dreyer. And finally, you'll hear how they chose to put together a companion book called Yesterday's Home that was released alongside the record. And it's all coming up right after this. So let's say you've just finished the latest round of mix revisions, or the last few tracks on a production you've been working on, but you want instant feedback before you go and ship them out. That's where Audio Mover steps in. Their revolutionary technology allows you to stream high-quality audio in real time, making remote collaboration a breeze. And with Audio Mover's Listen To plugin, there's no need for complicated setups or endless file sharing. Simply stream your audio directly from your favorite DAW to anyone, anywhere in the world in real time. And now with their newest plugin, they've made it possible to apply binaural rendering to Dolby Atmos mixes, allowing you to monitor how the spatial audio will sound on Apple Music. Through innovations like this, Audio Movers is leading a revolution in web-based audio transmission and reimagining the way musicians, podcasters, and educators engage with the world around them. So check them out at audiomovers.com and start your free trial today. One of the toughest hurdles for musicians and producers to overcome is recognizing when it's time to let your music go. So stop letting your music sit there on a hard drive waiting for the perfect label scenario to show up. Let DistroKid help you start reaching the fans you deserve right now. There's a reason why DistroKid is the go-to platform for independent musicians across all genres, and it's because they offer seamless and affordable solutions to distribute your music worldwide. Get your tracks on all the most popular streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and so many more in just a few steps. Time is often money, and DistroKid understands that. So they've eliminated long wait times for processing your music in the system. And in fact, they can get your music live in as little as 24 to 48 hours now. The simplicity of the platform and features like automatic revenue splits and YouTube content IDs make distributing your music and collecting payments incredibly simple. DistroKid does not take a percentage of your royalties, and for one low annual fee, you keep 100% of what you own. It's straightforward, transparent, and affordable. So follow the link in our show notes to get 30% off your new DistroKid membership and start letting your music work for you. Brad, we are super happy that you could join us. You're a bit far away from us, living in Australia as you do. So the time zone coordination has been a little tricky, but also you guys, as we say this, you've been busy doing a lot of touring, doing a lot of anniversary touring, actually, as you mentioned, for the 10-year run on Wildlife, which is another phenomenal record, but actually, funny enough, not the one that we're going to really dive into today. But so we appreciate you making the time, dude.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. This is going to be a really good one. So obviously you've been, well, I think you wear a couple hats, but for those that maybe don't know, we'll start here, right? The band is called La Dispute. What is your role in that band and how has that maybe changed? For those that don't know, you maybe like give just a little Cliff Note intro to the band. Obviously we'll dive much deeper, but.
Yeah, okay. Well, I played drums in the band. And my cousin and I, Jordan, who sings in the band, started it when we were still kids, basically. We worked at a hardware store that our parents own, and we would just listen to music all day. And one day we're like, yeah, we should start a band. That'd be cool. And here we are.
It's as easy as that.
Many years later.
It is that easy. If you're listening, if you're in a band,
that's all you have to do.
Working at a hardware store right now, just start a band and the next 20 years, you're good. You're golden.
Yep, that's it.
There's nothing in between. Absolutely nothing of note.
You know.
No, if that were true, we clearly wouldn't have a show. So I'm glad you mentioned that you and Jordan are cousins, because that was a really interesting thing. I think about maybe specifically with this record and the writing that went into it, the record being Rooms of the House that came out back in March of 2014.
Mm-hmm.
What has that writing dynamic been like over the years, and how did it start off writing songs with your cousin, right? Like, what did that look like at first? Because I think that, that'll inform people, especially about this record specifically, how it kind of, there's a lot there from a familial ties standpoint that I'd love to go into a little bit. But how did it start out? What was the, just you guys in a room? What were the roles? That kind of thing.
Let me backtrack. I made it sound very simple. The band is not just me and Jordan by any means.
No.
There's 5 of us, and everyone in the band contributes massively. So Chad, Adam, Corey are the other 3. And they're the 3 most talented musicians I know, so I'm very honored to be in a band with them. With that out of the way, what we started, it wasn't that group of people yet. Do you guys remember the band At the Drive-In, of course?
Yes.
Yes, of course. We did a cover song of an At the Drive-In song.
Oh, really?
Which one?
The last track on Relationship.
Non-Zero Possibility.
Yes.
Or Catacombs if you do the Japanese one.
Cool.
Yeah.
We had a couple of friends from high school that just came in to jam. It was actually Chad's older brother was the original guitar player. So he stayed in the family.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, so that's how it started. We just had fun and wanted to write our own songs. And most of the early years, so we practiced in a warehouse that was adjacent to the actual hardware store where they kept all the extra inventory. And it had a big staircase that led up to like a elevated platform, this massive warehouse. And we just left our gear set up there. It was really fun. Just got to fuck around for hours after work. And, we were just kids. So it's just fun. Just like, I'm sure same thing with Wonder Years. You guys just ripped it when you were...
A little bit. Now, it's not all fun, right? So at a certain points, there are struggles, of course. Maybe we'll get into that. So for context, too, from a location standpoint, this was in Michigan, where you're talking about the hardware store where you guys grew up, right? Tell us a little bit about that town, especially because Tom is just chomping at the bit because he's a huge Upper Peninsula fan.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Michigan's beautiful. We grew up in Grand Rapids, except Adam and Corey, Indiana, and Corey lives in Rhode Island. But originally, everyone was from Michigan. And yeah, Grand Rapids, beautiful city. It's on the west side of the state. And it's known for beer and food. And we've got the Great Lakes. And yeah, it's a great place to, I guess, be in the arts without sounding really pretentious. But it is, because I think you have a lot of exposure to a lot of different things. And especially at the time, it was a really good local like punk scene as well. So a lot of venues on the main street downtown, and like all the bands just supported each other. It was really inclusive and a great community. So we were so lucky to kind of come up in that atmosphere. It wasn't, I think for some bands, they face a lot of like maybe competition, or like, you know, like bands get jealous of other groups, and it's not really a community, which is a shame.
Yeah.
But I think I know Grand Rapids, and definitely know that Philly is all about community. So it's cool. I think
Big
all
time.
of us are pretty lucky to have grown up in that.
Yeah. What were some of the other bands in that Michigan scene that either that y'all looked up to, or that, you know, were kind of like doing the supportive thing where you couldn't be more spot on. Actually, obviously we toured with a band from Michigan for years. Some of our best friends to this day, a band called Fireworks that have,
Are they from Detroit, right?
Yeah. Freakishly talented. But it's the same thing where it's just like, we always felt like we were chasing them. They'd put out a record, be like, oh my God. All right. Well, they just completely changed the game and upped the bar. All right. Well, we got to get serious now and go do something. So I'm sure you guys have that, but, you know,
it's good. That's a healthy sort of competitive, but in a friendly sort of like, let's all better each other. Let's push each other a bit. That's how it should be.
Yeah. Were there some of those bands around there?
Yeah. It was actually a label that we really liked, a smaller label run by, there's a venue now called the Pyramid Scheme in Grand Rapids that a lot of bands play. But the owner of that used to run a record label originally, Jeff. And we put out our first EP with him. But all the bands on that label we loved. It was like, none of these bands do anything anymore, but it was when Victor Fix the Sun, we loved them. Ari, the community around it. Well, I keep saying that, but there was a little venue called the DAC, the Division Avenue Arts Cooperative, and it was like pretty much all those bands played there all the time, and we'd all go watch each other play, and it was just really, really special.
Yeah.
And,
wow. Yeah.
Just absorbing a ton of talent and a ton of great ideas all at once. Mm-hmm. What was the name of the label that Jeff started, by the way?
Friction Records.
Okay. Well, go look that for anybody that's curious. Yes, because I would agree. And especially even if you're not, but if you're already a La Dispute fan, then you should go. It's one of my favorite things to do, to like find the origins of all the bands that grew up, and that band came out of, because it's always one, very telling. And then two, it's like you end up most likely finding like a wealth of amazing bands. You're like, how did this band, that's awesome. So try to link to that in the show notes as well too.
I was going to say another big one in Michigan, Bear versus Shark. They did quite well.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So we played with them a few times. Jordan and Chad probably saw them play 15 times at the DAC, and they were just so good.
Incredible band. And you know what, that for what you guys do too, like musically, it makes a lot of sense as well. It's like there's definitely a crossover in the DNA there, and the energy. So I love that. So you had a really great supportive scene, right? So you'd made these records, or that initial EP, and then you made the first full length that y'all released with No Sleep, right?
Yep.
Very quickly, like, how did that go in terms of like, okay, this is the first LP, you're, kind of getting your sea legs on as a band, right? You're probably doing a lot more touring. What did you find out in that period, and how did that kind of start to transform the band and momentum?
The biggest thing, I think, like Chris reached out to us, just an email or something. And, at the time we're just self-managing, I booked all the tours and shows and stuff. So we kind of like, is this necessary? We can just take a chance on it. It's not a big deal. It's not a huge label. Cool. Maybe we can grow with the label, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think like the selling points really were the other bands on the label that, well, obviously Wonder Years and Touche Amore. And we were like, this is awesome. Like, they're actually really good, talented, cool bands. So let's do this.
Well, you're being generous with what we were offering at that time. Let's be real. But thank you. Yes, but Touche, an incredible band that we were also in love with and highly respected at that time too. So it wasn't interesting. He was reaching out and finding some really, really talented bands at that time.
Yeah, it was good. So on the back of that, I guess We recorded in Grand Rapids with some friends and basically just booked a ton of shows. And we were playing every weekend. I'd book little weekends, in Michigan, but then Indiana, Illinois, just around Midwest area. You know how it goes. You email friends. We played a show with Touche, went out to California, all those firsts. It was really cool. And I guess as far as what we learned, we learned a lot what not to do.
Yeah. What were some of the things that you learned not to do?
We were just naive kids it's an advantage when you're a young band because you can take risks and you don't need to worry about consequences because there's not much at stake, But I think booking our own tours and a lot of shows would fall through and then you'd just be chilling out for a few days, which is fun when you're young, but
yeah,
money's not great. But I guess the positives we learned, the biggest thing I think that I can take away from those early days of touring is how important, again, I'm going to sound so redundant, but just it was the same thing, just building that community. And we were extending it because you're making friends out of state. And, we played with the Wonder Years in Philly and many years in that apartment upstairs. It was awesome. And it's all those firsts that I remember the most. And the people that I'm still, even if not in touch with regularly, still respect a great deal. So
yeah, that's awesome. And I always love hearing everybody's kind of origin story and the formative years and point and jump off point with whether it's the debut EP, LP, because it is such a special time, right? But so then that kind of sets the stage for this where it put you guys on the map, and it decidedly did, first in some DIY communities and then in a much broader, more respected kind of umbrella of the kind of punk community, right? And people started covering the band, started talking about the record, and started obviously you put the work in and do play shows, even as many of them might fall through. Y'all had a following, right? So there were expectations, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, we're a band, we're making records, we're doing this, right? So then let's kind of fast forward. Not that I or anybody should skip over what came next, because it was also an incredible record, but we'll do our best to give it its due by talking about, by the time Wildlife had come out, right?
Yeah.
Which was the next record, LP2. And that had obviously done incredible things for you. We just mentioned y'all just wrapped up an amazing 10-year anniversary tour for that record, actually, that saw the band's biggest headline show to date.
Crazy.
So that's nuts. So a record so clearly it cemented you with fans and really galvanized a hold in that scene, time being hindsight, as it is right now. So then from there, where do you go after that album cycle is done, so to speak? They were maybe a little longer back then, but than what the industry likes to try and push for now. But so, when you turn your heads to writing, what was the thought process in terms of what comes next? I mean, these are incredible outpourings of not only lyrical concepts, but also musicality, right? And there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of notes, and there's a lot of well-crafted, well-thought-out notes on La Dispute records. So it's got to take a lot out of you. So where did y'all find yourselves when you're like, okay, what's LP3?
Yes. I think this time around, because this was going to be the third record and we were all a bit older now, so we had partners and things like that. So it wasn't as easy and carefree. So we decided, let's go somewhere for a month and just live together, write a bunch of songs, see what happens. No pressure. If something cool comes out of it, great. If not, we had a fun little holiday. So we went to a place called the Lundgren Tree Farm, and it's in the Upper Peninsula. A lot of people think it's Wisconsin, but it actually is Michigan. It's in Menominee, Michigan. It's a good 7 hours away from Grand Rapids because you got to go through Chicago around, but just absolutely beautiful place. And you can actually, I pulled up the Airbnb because you can still rent this place. It is just a beautiful property. Seriously, they've got the main house, and it's got a wood stove and fireplace and just a piano it's like a cabin kind of thing.
Yeah.
Hundreds of books everywhere. Beautiful old stove, and then there's a gazebo by a lake. Separate bedrooms. There's a pool table room. It's like a separate place with original Barnum and Bailey posters hanging on the wall. This place is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Stained glass. The barn was turned into an office. There's an art studio there. There's a library. It's truly, it's like a fairy tale. The place is so cool.
I'm looking at it right now.
Brad. Oh, you found it. How good.
I found it.
You got to put that in the chat, dude.
I'm 100%. I mean, this place is...
It's cool, right?
I'm booking my vacation right now, honestly.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Jennifer's going to get a lot of requests very quickly come spring. Let me tell you.
You're welcome, Jennifer.
Yeah. Oh, my God. I hope she's a super host. This is, I mean, what a cool and inspiring space. And a lot of bands talk about this, right? But when it comes down to it, I feel like a lot of them, they never really like fully commit to like the writing retreat kind of thing. And certainly not in this way, right? Sometimes you get, especially nowadays, you can be like, okay, this is technically a place that you can be, but nobody's really happy or enthralled to wake up and write. But this does seem like a really like, it's it has everything that one probably loves about Michigan, right? As some Michiganders. But it's also got like a really stripped down kind of charm where it's like just enough to keep things really interesting, but also
absolutely.
Space. You have a lot of bodies in there. So it seems like there's kind of time to also fan out afterwards. What did the process walk me through? And we definitely will, Tom. We're gonna link to this and throw some of the photos in here too, because this is a really cool and very inspiring space.
Yeah. So we got there, we set up. It was still it was coming to spring at the time, so there was still snow on the ground when we arrived. It melted by the time we left, but so. At first, we just were trying to find a little routine. So we set up the gear in the main like living room area, which is great because lots of natural light. There was huge windows and you could see the pond from them. So the atmosphere was good and positive. So we'd usually, what we settled on was like, if we start by 10 o'clock, everyone can chill out in the morning, do whatever, go for a little walk. And we'd go just until we felt like that was enough for the day. So some days it'd just be a couple hours, but if we're on a roll and everyone's feeling good, we had a couple nights when we went till like 6 or 7 p.m. With little breaks. And then we'd have like a big dinner together in the evening. There definitely were stresses and it was out of some people's comfort zones a bit, but I think overall we came to a really cool sort of, people got space when they needed it, but also we could come together and just jam. We also set up sort of, so that main room was like, we all jammed together. And then we had a couple little smaller spaces where people could work in smaller teams, like two people. Like sometimes Chad and I would go into the library together. He had a little amp there. And I had, at the time, a mobile demo rig. So I had different stations set up throughout the place. And yeah, it was cool. Just be creative. It was really fun to have that freedom.
Yeah, because of how you had it set up, could you like pinpoint a moment on the record that maybe wouldn't have come together like how it did?
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple actually. The first track, there's two songs I can really hear the space, as corny as that sounds, but the first track, Hudsonville, was written there and I can just see it in my head, me staring at Chad and Adam coming up with the main riff on that. But another really cool, this is a fun fact for people. So there's a song, Scenes from Highways, and it starts out with a sample, and that's me in the rowboat out there, and you can hear a little bird in the background, and that bird would sing every morning. And Chad wrote, the riff is the bird melody, and he turned into a riff, and that's the whole song. So little stuff like that. Like it was just really
that's beautiful.
inspiring to be there. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
Tom loves that. Tom, this is everything.
wow.
Tom found sourced sounds in nature turned into loops. That's Tom's bread and butter. He's never been happier on this show.
Yeah, dude, Jennifer's getting a quick booking right now for next week.
Right.
Let's go.
It's cool. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff. Like they had a record player in there with hundreds of old records, and there was just some, like at the time I was really into field recordings, and I mean I still like that stuff, but that was like I was just getting into that weirder side of like ambient and that every early 20s kid does. But I sampled so many records, like in the weirdest stuff, like old records released for like sound experiments from like universities, and I'm sure these things were in print of like 50 or something, and this guy just had them. He collected them. There was another one that was like all of bird calls of Michigan in like a little 10-inch. It was incredible, and I just sampled all this stuff, and I had big ambitions to scatter it throughout the record. There are pieces in there that have it, but it's not my sound collage that I envisioned. But it would have been ridiculous, so I'm glad we didn't do that. But still, you just exploring.
Oh my God. Do you still have these?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm an archiver. There was an old radio in the library that I just would flip through and find the local stations. I recorded that.
What were you able to tune in on that? What kind of local stations were we getting up there?
The weirdest one was, and this gives you an idea of the landscape at the time.
Well, because I'm looking at the landscape and I'm like, what kind of radio stations are you getting up there?
What you'd imagine. It was a guy talking about how someone had come into his house. It was like protective child services or something, and taken away his kids. And like, it was like weirdly intense. And I couldn't quite figure out what side he was on the subject. And it was just so fascinating. I just clicked record and I was like, okay, here we go. This is some Northern Michigan shit right here.
Yeah. Wow. It's so funny, like old houses and old properties. It actually reminds me even very quickly, we, like talked about fireworks and taught, you tour with bands, you end up at just these weird properties, right? And Wonder Years, one of the things that we did very much love to do is on a tour, like if we have an off day, like try to encourage, like find an Airbnb that is willing to accommodate 20 to 30 grown, well, use that term loosely, large adult-sized males.
It is such a tough sell.
Right.
It's really tough sell.
It's a very tough sell. But some of the spots that we've ended up in, one of them was actually with fireworks many years ago. And it reminds me of like the character that kind of similar to like what this place has going on. So remote, like backwoods, driving to it with the van and trailer. We're like, this is definitely not a real place. We're 100% like Children of the Corn going to get murdered. There's no way. And then you get there and it's some weird like eccentric millionaire that's retired. It's like, yep, this was my cabin. I built it all out of like reclaimed driftwood, and the main mast that runs 60 feet through the house is an old canoe that I found.
Exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? It's really that, but then the things that they have, like the sheet music or record collection or just books are always
That's what made it so special,
the
man.
strangest, right? Was there anything else? So, I love that from a soundscape standpoint, some of those things very decidedly ended up being influential on the record with the guitar part. Were there any other things that the band went back and forth in? Like walk me through like that, like kind of the day-to-day dynamic, I guess, because I'm sure everybody's kind of like bringing ideas, one after the other, every day, but in true band fashion, they're not all winners, or they, there might be a little polarizing to some. Do you remember any of the things that like were kind of brought up that were maybe out of left field, or that the band went back and forth on for a while? Yeah,
Jordan had a few ideas, because the way we like to work is if he sort of has direction for what the scope of the record should be, or the themes and all that stuff. And he had already settled on like this, rooms of the house theme. So like how places are the same, but they change. And it was just so fitting to have this property where you just can imagine the stories that went through this place.
Big time.
One of his ideas was, it's cool. I found my old notes from the time as well. So I've got like Rooms of the House 1.0, track listing, all the old names. But he had this idea really early on to have groups of pairings. So there were two songs. I mean, you can tell because sonically some of these songs go really well together, but he had these women song pairings, which we called Love Song 1 and Love Song 2, which is Woman in Mirror and Woman Reading, which are, sonically a bit different for us at the time, but wholly intentional to do something so that it was like a very obvious, here's something, here's another something, they live in the same universe. And there were a few more songs like that he had paired up early on. Not all the songs made it on the record. We recorded one other one with Will that we didn't put on the record, but all the other ones we recorded there are. But yeah, there was a lot of demos from the time too that, got to a certain stage, but we just, as you go on, you start to get a feel for the sonic sort of palette that you want.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For the record, and especially for our band, every band says this, but we never want to repeat the same thing. And especially on Rooms, we wanted it to be like, this has to be a departure from Wildlife. So I really think that being in this space helped that, because it just was so out of the first two records were written in the same warehouse. This was just a whole nother thing. And yes, I'm really meandering here, but those are the things I remember the most from sort of being there. And there was the art studio. Another really cool memory I have is Jordan and I, when it was towards the end, and we probably had like 15 ideas or something. And he and I just sat in the art studio together there and just made so many different ideas for track listings, how the pairings could space out nicely on the record so it has a nice arc to it, what things potentially had to go. And I think once you get past a certain point in writing, it's so helpful to get it all on paper in front of you and sort of get your compass set correctly and like, this is how we need to finish this. Let's focus our energy here.
Yeah. So in that way, would you say that the track listing itself started to inform the writing and the compositional styling as you got towards the end?
Absolutely. Yep.
I am curious, like, at what point do you think you saw that shift where you're like, okay, now we know what building blocks we're going after, right? Like now, like when does that start and how, especially so from like a percussive rhythmic standpoint, I mean, you have a killer rhythm section for the band, right? Like, but obviously not every song starts there, like where do you start to know at what point do you have enough critical mass to be like, hey, this is the next thing that, on our whiteboard?
Yeah. Well, it's usually filling in gaps. So we'll start with Jordan's rough sort of map, and he keeps fine tuning it as we go. And, we're sort of working in tandem the whole time. He's really good at knowing when he hears something that is going to work well, especially thematically. We can just jam on something. If Jordan's like, I love that, let's do this. And so we'll expand that idea. And then once you have enough of those, let's say like my original notes here have 12 songs on it. This is draft 1, so there's a few songs that didn't make it and there's different placements, but we probably had a good 5 of these ideas enough that we could play them together in a room. And then you kind of go, okay, this song, Hudsonville, which was called Queen Jane at the time, this has to be track 1. It has to be. So do you start there? And then you're like, well, it's all about the arc too. So high energy song, would you want to keep it going more, playing off? I think some of the best records have 2 big, fast, or not necessarily fast, but that's the Radiohead thing. 2 bangers out the front, and then you have a beautiful fall. And that's what I love to do. That's what we did with this one.
I love that.
But then you just figure out what's missing. And then if we've got a song that works really well here and it's paired with another song, we're not going to put those next to each other. So you already have a rule set in place that has to go further on the record. And then it's just like piecing a puzzle together. It's fun, frustrating, but fun.
Yeah. Do you have any, I'm curious, do you have any ways to like visually represent this? I know, like I mentioned a whiteboard, Wonder Years Land is like, we're whiteboardaholics. I think every record, there's like more of them than the last record show. We're going to like just put us in a room that's just that's just completely whiteboard top to bottom.
Next Airbnb for you.
There you go.
Yeah, there you
just
go.
all the walls are it's just a bucket of dry erase markers. See if you survive. But do you take other ways of trying to like slice and dice or look at this, like curate energy, keys, feel? How do you kind of
Yeah,
categorize stuff to know?
definitely. For Wildlife, we did this big time. Adam, they play bass in our band, but also all the artwork is Adam and art direction and stuff.
Yeah, he's done stuff for Wonder Years too. Years ago, I think one of the shirts they did. I think so, and I might be.
That's cool.
My memory is bad. Dan has the better memory, but I do know that because I remember seeing a bunch of Adam's stuff a lot, and obviously, yeah, very talented.
No, Adam's incredible. So yeah, they made a whole like poster designed, and it had dynamic arcs and track listing and icons next to it for Wildlife. So it was nuts. For this one, we wanted to do something different to that. So Jordan was doing a lot of handwritten notes and things. So similar but different, I guess. It more fit the atmosphere of the cabin we were in.
Right, a little bit more organic, a little bit more rustic of a take. Yeah, not as methodical mad scientist. I like it. No, and finally, I'm wondering. You mentioned being a band that you always want to make sure you're not treading over the same ground, right?
Yeah.
When you went into write this record, were there certain parameters or guide rails that you set out for yourselves or for everybody, saying, hey, we're explicitly not doing this? Or, how did you approach things like that? Or did you just say, no, we'll know if it sounds too much like our last stuff?
I do know Wildlife was really textured and layered. It was also very organic, but for this one, we wanted fewer layers. We wanted to be more like 5 people playing in a room, I guess.
Or a cabin.
Or a cabin, yes. So yeah, kind of maintaining that natural aesthetic and simplicity. We wanted it to be more simple. A simpler record than Wildlife, but still be emotionally engaging and still tell a really cool story.
Yeah, well, I think you nailed it.
Thank you.
But I might be a little biased.
Yeah.
As many of you independent artists or musicians already know, the journey doesn't end once you have a finished master in hand. Building a lasting career around your music requires additional activities to develop, promote, and ultimately monetize your creative vision. And for those of us who aren't quite doing Taylor Swift level numbers yet, it helps to have a merchandising partner that can meet you where you're at right now. And for many, Smart Punk MFG is that one-stop shop for all merch manufacturing needs. Whether it's screen printing, embroidery, stickers, vinyl and CD production, posters, seriously, pretty much anything under the sun, I've seen them get it done. And most importantly, they do it all while offering reasonable pricing at feasible quantities. So before you head out on your next tour, go check out some of their work at smartpunkmfg.com. And when you're ready, shoot them an email at info@smartpunkmfg.com and mention the record process to get 20% off your first order.
So Brad, once the writing retreat was over and you have songs, what stage were they in? And what was the next step after you had the track listing and these demos?
Songs were in various states of demo. I did track a lot of stuff there, but none of them had vocals yet. When we got back home, we were also touring during this time. So we'd have little sessions where Jordan would come to my house and we'd, demo vocal ideas and things like that. We felt like we were still missing a piece as well. So there was one song that when we were touring Tasmania, actually, I remember this, just during sound check, Adam started playing a bass riff and pretty much the whole song we wrote on stage there. But it was there were a little pieces to fill in, and we needed to get demos over to Will, who was producing the record. So yeah, it was kind of like sending rough sketches and figuring out, it was really obvious what songs still needed work. And I've got a whole notebook to prove it with all my notes from 10 years ago, which is crazy to look at. But yeah, it's I could work on a record till I die, which is a terrible trait. So I think you got to leave the demos at demos, and then you go to record and you're like, here we are, let's do it. What does it still need? And not get married too much to those stupid demos that you wrote.
You mentioned you knew some of the songs even going into it. A lot of bands are like, oh, well, we know this one's unfinished, or like this one still have some question marks on this. What were there anything, any feedback that was surprising, either to you personally or to the band once you kind of floated stuff out to Will and had that first round of feedback? Because this is the first time I believe y'all worked with Will.
It was the first time we worked with Will.
Yeah. So was there anything initially that you guys were like kind of taken back by, thoughts, ideas, questions that he raised?
You know how positive Will is. So there wasn't any, it's not like
right?
He had, there were no notes that were like, this still needs work. He basically just said that he could hear what the songs wanted to be, which is cool. That the best producer can see the final output before you even step in the studio. So it was really cool. And I think Will is so good, besides his impeccable skills as an engineer, he's so good at leveling with the band and where they're at that moment. And he doesn't necessarily impart his vision for what the band should be. He kind of just becomes that extra member and helps it be the best. And that's the biggest takeaway, I think, from his feedback was like, let's just make this record that you want to do the best thing it can be. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important too, is not coming in with a heavy hand or trying to fit a band into a mold, right? And, there's obviously a range of styles when it comes to producers, but I think that's probably why the record came out so great, and working with a band like y'all that has so many creative driving forces within it, that's not an easy task, especially if somebody were going in trying to be like, I have to make this perfect record and it has to be X, Y, and Z, and I think that's when you start to really get in trouble and when you start to butt heads. But I think, like you said, not only his positivity, but the way he does that is kind of like the auxiliary, the honorary band member for that time and space, that just happens to be turning knobs as well. I would also wonder, like, when you got into the studio there and started tracking, laying down demos, right, or vocals rather, what was the process in the setup? Because y'all are very much, as you mentioned, like a group of musicians in a room, having seen you guys play live, there's a synergy there, that really, really is infectious, and it's kind of how the songs, the intent with which the songs are written. So how did you guys go about trying to preserve that, or what, was there anything special? How did you guys record? Right, I assume it was track by track, or what was the setup?
We wanted to do it track by track. I just think recording is more fun that way. It's just how I like to do it. And we did have a lot of different drum setups and stuff.
Okay.
But basically what we did, and I don't know if Will does this with all the bands he works with, but we would play the songs and record demos of them together. And then we would figure out if the tempos are good, play live again, and then Will would make a tempo map to us playing without a click, but then there's something to play to. And then I would track drums and the others would overdub over top, which for Wildlife was different because a lot of the songs Adam and I recorded live together. So his bass and drums recorded at the same time. So this was like a nice compromise, not doing it live, but still have that energy.
Yeah. You kind of give yourselves and I do like, when I see producers approach this, and Will does this. So Wonder Years has done stuff with Will, I believe, in this same fashion. But I've heard, Will's not the only producer that does it this way, obviously, of course, too. But in this way, when you have a rhythm section that's played so much together, that is with such a, the songs that are so focused on that pocket and those grooves being real and feeling, not just guitarically correct, but like emotively correct, right?
Yeah, it's got to have that feel.
Yeah. You guys almost overlaying your own scratch track as the guide. And then, so I've actually, like the full band will play and record a scratch. Drummers got click, everybody's got click in their ears, right? Remove the click and then go look back and then see and then map the click to the actual band, ebbing and flowing, or the drummer ebbing and flowing those hit points. And then that's the tempo map that's kind of played to an overdub. So it's almost like you're allowing the band to be a band and create their own actual like non-quantized kind of line to follow. And I think that's very helpful. And I think you get records that feel more real, as you mentioned, that feel more like a band playing together, even though it was still overdubbed, So I love that. That seemed like the perfect fitting in it. I mean, the record sounds great, and it feels like, for a band like that, it feels like a La Dispute show. It feels like what a band should feel like. That's the hardest part, right? Is capturing what you build in those shows and figure out about yourselves early on in those in that DIY space and community, and figuring out how to get what is there and what is real to translate to somebody that's listening back on a recording that's never seen you, heard you, knows nothing about you, right? That's a great approach. And I'm glad you also had the perspective of doing it in a couple different ways, right? So it's, that it's not recording every record the exact same methodology and flow, because that can also get tiresome too. And it's how we learn, You mentioned drum setups. I mean, for all the drummers out there that might be listening, talk through, how some of the drum setups were approached for this, if your memory serves, because obviously Will is a killer drummer himself. So, he wears he can wear a lot of hats, but obviously, those drums are his baby. And in that Studio 4 room, it's a killer sounding room and has a lot of history. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, it was awesome. From the get-go, I told Will that I wanted a little bit of a tighter drum sound than he had been getting on the last few records he did, and he was cool with that. So we adjusted accordingly.
And what kind of adjustments, like when you say tighter?
We just kind of made a room within a room almost, and some blankets up and stuff. Just, I wanted something where we could still make the drums sound a lot tighter if we wanted to, and then bring up the room mics. Because the beauty of that room, obviously, is it's very live. But then the problem is it's hard to squash it back down if you want to.
It's hard to take it out of the equation once it's in.
It is, yeah. So we wanted to try to find something that, because the record's pretty dynamic, a way that we could play with it a bit. A couple songs I recorded in the storage room in the back, which is a really small room.
Oh yeah, it is. I wonder if that's probably where he keeps all his pedals and stuff now, across the hall from the B room.
Yep. So we did, I think, 2 songs in there. But yeah, it was kind of like, again, I'm sure every band does this, but like making the drums work for the song. So the songs that need huge drums, open it up. But then songs like the Woman songs, I wanted them really, really tight and dead. And so we did that. A lot of different snare drums. For the tighter songs, I used a Ludwig Acrolite that I've had since I was in 8th grade. Like, I got it when I joined school band. I've just kept that snare forever. And it's the coolest, pingiest, stupidest snare. And it just sounds so cool. So I used that a bit on it. And yeah, fucked around with a lot of percussion stuff. Just like more off the wall stomps and claps, just to keep that organic nature, but also have like ear candy for songs. Like these songs are a lot less linear than we had done in the past. So if you're going to have a verse and a chorus, which we hadn't done much before, I wanted verse 2 to be just a bit different. So it's cool. So you add something there, or take something away. And it was just a lot of that. It was like meticulous, but practiced, and thoughtful, adding and subtracting for this record. And that's with drums, with guitars, with everything. That's what made it so fun. And Will fully threw himself into it too.
Yeah, I mean, talking about like the production level of things, there's so many things that you can add and take away and do all that stuff. Yeah. And being that everyone is the musicians that they are, when it came time to like mix that all together, how was that process with Will? And was the band there? Was the band involved in the mixes? Or
I stayed after for a few days after everyone had gone home. We didn't do the mixes, but we talked about. I did a lot of overdubs after everyone had left. All the key parts and percussion and extra drum things, like, again, calculated, so it's not like an orchestra sounding crazy thing. But while I was there, Will and I talked about aesthetically what we wanted it to feel like. We wanted Jordan to be pretty present for this record. Yeah, again, I told him I wanted the drums to be a little more tame than he was used to, and he was fine with that. Yeah, and basically just every song leaving space for the instrumentation. So you make sure that there's guitar 1 and guitar 2, and you can clearly hear what each one is doing, rather than guitar 1 is actually guitar 1 5 times on top of each other. And, that's cool. It's a nice wall of sound, but that wasn't the vibe for this.
Yeah.
So, and he was fully on board too. And I think at the time, Will was really used to a lot of doubling, tripling guitars. And he was just like, no, let's do it. Let's have it be the 2 guitars. And yeah, it was awesome, man. He was really, really open to it.
That's great. I'm curious. So, I mean, we'd be remiss without at least mentioning it for anybody that isn't aware or hasn't listened to a lot of Dispute records yet. The vocal styling that Jordan has is quite unique, right? And in delivery and in a lot of things, it has a wealth of character, right? But it isn't what a lot of would call, the conventional like rock vocalist, right? Rock singer, right? What were the conversations like? I mean, obviously y'all had done 2 records before, but the conversations with Will about how to treat that. Because I know also even, Dan, who sings for Wonder Years, is very sometimes particular about both the way in which his vocals are recorded, doubled, and or how they're treated in a mix standpoint. Some singers are like, oh my God, drown me, make me sound like I'm in an arena, like I'm souling out in an arena. And other singers are like, what's that weird thing that kind of makes my vocal feel like it's more places than just right in the middle, So I'm curious where y'all landed with that and what that conversation with Will was like too, because he'd obviously made a lot of, big kind of rock records, some of which had really, reverberant and affected vocal kind of textures. So what was that conversation like?
I think when we got to this point, we kind of knew what sounded best for Jordan, which is you have a nice mic, a Neumann, 47 or something close, and you get that nice intimate sort of vibe when you need it, and then room mics that you can open up when the intensity grows. That's what works for him. So we found it out pretty quick, and Will liked that vibe too. Artificial stuff doesn't work well on Jordan. It just doesn't. It sounds phony. Fake reverbs, throws and things. It doesn't work. It's got to be a room.
So is that room, is that the main live room, or is that, I know Will likes to do a lot of his vocals in the control room as well sometimes even?
Not with Jordan. All in the live room.
Where did he place those, like those area mics? Like, are we talking like cross room mics, or are we talking just like, 10, 15 feet back?
15 feet. And then he had a mic real far back. I think even in that separate sliding glass door room that you can blend to taste. But
awesome.
It works well for Jordan.
Yeah, it does. And it's a unique challenge and thing too, where it's like, I think a band like that, it's so baked into the sound, right? And it so is that sound that it's so important to at the very least get that right. And almost in like, in an interesting way, I feel like maybe it acts as that anchor point so that you can explore a lot of other space instrumentally around it, right? Because
Absolutely.
It is that style and people, it is that focus point. And it's also, I mean, you don't want to get it wrong, and it's the story and the narrative is so much that your fans come to expect, and there's so much thought put into it. You don't want to treat it in a way that covers it up.
For sure. And I think things like when you get into the technical stuff too, like compressing a vocal, especially like a harder sung vocal, you lose, obviously that's what compression is, but you lose a lot of the dynamic range. So if you're able to blend that in with a beautiful room that is still capturing that super dynamic of the performance, you can blend to taste, and you're not losing that. I don't know. I think compression with Jordan ruins a lot of stuff. So it's good to have both. Yeah.
No, that's honestly a really phenomenal point in terms of trying to preserve, especially when you're like, for anybody playing in punk bands, rock bands, where you're trying to get over loud drums, loud guitars, right? I mean, DIY, like, like bands like in VFW halls, like it's vocals are not even a thing, right? So you're like, fine, you're already kind of just squashing it, and it's getting limited by clipping the PA, and which is then, speakers are clipping, right? Like, but to actually recreate that, there is an energy lost, even though sometimes, I think it can be very easy to think, ooh, yeah, that like aggression and distortion and compression, like that's awesome. It's like, in this case, like that inflection is the storytelling depth that lyrical presentation offers. So that's a great way of capturing it. And I'm sure, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it, but that's a great and very honest, organic way to use the room that you have for vocals. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think so, for sure.
That reminded me of Tony Visconti, the producer for Bowie on the Heroes song. That's what they did with the reverb to get the vocals to do that. So it's really cool to see that technique make its way through different genres and leave this like beautiful arc.
Yeah.
Well, Brad, this has been incredible fun, and thank you so much for doing your best. I know it's been a while, but
it's okay.
Hey, the lesson we learned here is take notes when you're making records, because you might want to. Somebody might ask you questions about them, especially if the record's really successful 10 years later.
You're too kind. Thank you, guys.
Of course. I'd also want to note, too, that y'all did something really interesting with the release of this, around it as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and the book that accompanied it?
We did the typical bundle pre-order thing, but we put together a book that had a lot of Jordan's notes and sort of commentary. I took a bunch of film photos while we were there that surprisingly turned out great, because I'm not a very good photographer, but so that's in there, and just memories. It's pretty special. I mean, if for no one else, for the five of us, it's a very special thing to have, to kind of keep those memories, because it's a timestamp, and as we get older, we're going to forget this stuff, and I'm thankful that we have something like that I can, even doing this, man, it's fun looking back and just being thankful for that time, and that we're still a band. It's insane, like crazy. We're pretty lucky.
And you know what's, I couldn't agree more. And you know what I find really interesting is I've had the honor and pleasure of like actually seeing some of the things, like notes that we've scribbled down over the years, good, bad, like, and it really does kind of almost like turning this around to like the theme of the record that we just talked a lot about too, is like the history of things and how it's, so easily forgotten a lot of times. And even nowadays, it's so quick, and everything being in the digital realm, a lot of records are being made just like in someone's bedroom or just like in a closet, people, it's not as romanticized, so to speak. So I think a lot of times people aren't documenting it as much because they're like, yeah, well, this is just like, I'm checking the boxes. I'm recording this. I'm making this record. Or just like, it was on my laptop in like a library, in a coffee shop. Like, it's not that interesting, right? But it's all this little nuance that like, you don't necessarily have to go to a cabin even or whatever, or have like a whole, retreat around it to have it still be worthwhile to document some of the things about where you were, the time and place, even if it's just like, hey, this is like taking a picture. And I think now some of it is done naturally just via social media, right? People, and that's kind of what it's become. It's become this ongoing time capsule. So in some ways, I think, it's interesting to remind people that, like you said, maybe it's not always for everybody else. Maybe other people won't care. Maybe 3 people will ever hear whatever you're working on, but you also might want it at some point, and even more so, it's like sometimes from an artist mindset, maybe you don't think that it's, in your heart of hearts, you're like, it probably won't work out. But then if it does, 10, 20 years can go by really fast. And then, you'll be like, man, I do wish I had more pictures from when we recorded our first record, but all I have are like 3 blurry photos from my like Razor Motorola flip phone. You know what I mean? And that is true anecdotal proof of me not doing a great job back then even. So yeah, that's awesome that you have notes to look back through and kind of cue those memories. And you have an Airbnb listing that's still active that I will.
That's crazy.
Yeah, which is awesome. I got to go. It makes me want to go find the one that I mentioned that we stayed at with fireworks years ago. But anyway, Brad, dude, this was so much fun, man. Thank you so much for returning. Where can everybody, obviously we'll link to it, but follow along with you, what you're doing, what the band has coming up next, all that good stuff.
Yes, just all the normal stuff. The band's on Instagram, Facebook, everything, all those things that everyone's got. But yeah, we're touring this year and we're writing new music. So a lot of stuff will be coming.
Oh, good.
It's fun. Yeah. Thank you guys so much, Tom and Casey. Appreciate you both. Got a cool podcast.
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, thanks, Brad.
It's okay.